Hi, my name is Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to my June wrap up. So today is the 10th of June. I've finished 3 books so far. Just to say at the start that June is obviously Pride Month. So what I thought I would do is prioritise some of the LGBTQ books on my TBR. What I've done is I've pulled all the physical LGBTQ books from my physical TBR, put them here, and I'll pick from them as we go through the month. I won't read exclusively queer books in June, I don't think, not least because I've got 1 or 2 library books on their way to me. But I will try and prioritise as many queer books as I can. So the first book that I've read this month so far is it's a pure coincidence that my reading this coincided with the start of Pride Month, and it's The Night Watch by Sarah Waters. So this was a reread for me. I read this somewhere between 5 to 10 years ago, and I've got a little mini project going on at the moment where I am rereading all of Sarah Waters' books. So this is 2 of 6 for me. It's funny because The Night Watch is not one of my favourite Sarah Waters books, but I completely forgot how brilliant this is. I absolutely loved it. So it's historical fiction and it's set in London during and in the aftermath of the Second World War. We follow 4 main characters. So we have Kay, Helen, Viv and Duncan, and the book is really about the impact of the war on their lives and the changing relationships between all those characters, whether that be familial, friendship, romantic or otherwise. The book has an interesting structure in that we start off in 1947, so after the war, and we see these characters and what their lives are like following the war. And then we go back, the middle section is then set in 1944, so we understand a bit more about the characters' backgrounds and the relationships between them and so on. And then the book ends in 1941. I think it's a really effective way of telling the story. The characters in this book are wonderful. I think they're really well drawn. I love Sarah Waters' writing. I think her writing has a lovely flow to it without being overly flowery. It's a fairly long book, just under 500 pages long, but it didn't feel like a long book to me. I absolutely loved it. And obviously there are several queer characters in this book as well. And then the next book I read, this is a library book, this is Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian and McAllister. This is not an LGBTQ book. This is quite a recent release. It's a sort of crime psychological thriller. The reason I picked this up is because it's set where I live, and it does have an interesting premise. Right at the start of the book, our main character is looking out of an upstairs window of her home where she lives with her family, and she sees her son returning home after having been out during the evening, and she witnesses him murder someone in the street, someone who she doesn't know who they are. And then what happens is she goes back in time to the day before and continues to go back in time, and the book then is about her trying to figure out why her son has done this, who this person is, who he's murdered, and she is trying to find out enough information to hopefully prevent the murder occurring. Now, I quite like books that play around with time in different ways, but for me this was a good idea, not as successfully executed as I would have liked. I felt like it was a little bit of a slog to get through. We get various sort of different perspectives, and it is quite interesting how things come together. Sort of picked up a bit towards the end, but there was a point about halfway through where I did consider DNFing it. There was just about enough to keep me interested and to keep me reading until the end. A couple of the reveals I did guess. There was one reveal that I didn't guess. So, I mean, it was okay, but it's not a thriller that I would particularly recommend. And then the third book I've read this week is Hani and Ishu's Guide to Fake Dating by Adiba, Jaigirdar. And this is a YA romance. So this is by the author of The Henna Wars, which I read last year and absolutely loved. And this again was great. I didn't like it quite as much as the Henna Wars, but I still really enjoyed it. So in this book we follow two teenage girls, Hani and Ishu, who go to the same high school. It's set in Dublin, and they, for various reasons, decide to pretend to be dating each other. One of them wants to be head girl, and so she is doing this to sort of gain popularity with her classmates, and the other one is doing it because she's bisexual and her friends don't quite believe that she is bisexual, so she agrees to fake date the other girl. Obviously, you know, feelings develop between them as we go through. It's really well written. It looks at themes of race and religion and bisexuality and friendship, and it was just a really, really enjoyable read. I really like this author. Yeah, I think she's very, very good. So I would highly recommend. So it's the next day and I have finished another book, so I wanted to talk about it now while it's fresh in my memory. This is The Schoolhouse by Sophie Ward. This is a new release. So Sophie Ward is the author of Love and Other Thought Experiments, which was Booker longlisted a couple of years ago, which I really, really loved. Love and Other Thought Experiments is quite an experimental book, I would say, quite unusual in many ways. The Schoolhouse, by comparison, is really quite conventional, which is not necessarily a bad thing, is it? Maybe, but I was quite surprised by that. So let me tell you what this is about. I'm going to be careful not to give any spoilers because there is an important aspect of this story which is not mentioned on the blurb. It becomes apparent really quite early on in the book, but because it's not mentioned on the blurb, I'm not going to mention it either because I think that would be a spoiler. So we follow our main character, who is called Isabel. She lives in London and she works in a library. She lives a fairly isolated life. She becomes embroiled in a police investigation because a young schoolgirl has gone missing, and she has witnessed, or believes she has witnessed, this schoolgirl after she's gone missing. So therefore obviously the police interview and she becomes sort of involved in this investigation. We have three narrative perspectives. So we have Isabel's perspective, third person in the, well, current day, but current day is 1990 in the book. We also have the perspective from one of the police officers who has investigated this missing schoolgirl, again third person narration, and then we have some chapters which are in diary format, so first person narration from Isabel's diary from 1975. So in 1975 Isabel was a schoolgirl and she attended a school called the Schoolhouse. So as we go through the book we sort of see the links between the different narrative strands and the different timelines and how they sort of interconnect. There is a lot about childhood and secrets that become apparent, and trauma, I guess. A large part of the book just does read like a police procedural, obviously because we do have parts of the book told from the perspective of a police officer, and it is very much like a standard police procedural that you would read, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I like crime fiction, so that's, you know, fairly comfortable reading for me. I will say I enjoyed the first half of the book more than the second half. I felt like as we got towards the end of the book it became really much more of a police procedural, standard sort of crime thriller, actiony, which was slightly disappointing for me in the fact that, I don't know, because I loved this book that I read by Sarah Ward, and I still liked, Sarah Ward's a crime author, Sophie Ward, so I loved this book that I read by Sophie Ward, and I still liked The Schoolhouse, but I felt like I thought I was being set up for something that didn't quite pay off in the end. I will say that the protagonist of the book, Isabel, is a really interesting character, and I think the perspective that we hear from in the book is a perspective that I don't think I have ever heard from before. And I won't go into any detail about that because I think that would be a spoiler. But I do think that's really interesting, and I just feel like it didn't quite come together for me in the end. I was left feeling kind of confused, both from a sort of a practical point of view in terms of I'm not entirely sure how everything tied together. It became very plotty towards the end, which I felt was a bit of a shame because I feel like it was being set up looking at some really interesting things, and that maybe got lost along the way. I also feel a little bit confused about the author's intention with the book. Like, I'm not sure what this book is trying to be. I still enjoyed it. I still really enjoyed it. I still read more by Sophie Ward. But yeah, this was a strange one for me. Hello, it's now Saturday, the 18th of June, and I've actually only finished one book this week. I don't know what's going on, but it's a good one. It's Rainbow Milk by Paul Mendez. So this is a book I have been meaning to read for a while, and it did not disappoint. This is a debut novel. It was published a couple of years ago, and it's really very accomplished, I think. Our main character is called Jesse, who is a young gay black man living in the Black Country in the Midlands of England. He lives with his family, who are Jehovah's Witnesses, and as a result of that community's reaction to Jesse's sexuality, he ends up becoming estranged from his family, moves to London. He's about, I think, 19 years old at this point. Moves to London and becomes involved in sex work, and then most of the book is about Jesse's experiences living that life in London as a young gay black man. It's about people he meets through his work. It's very raw, unflinching. It's a very, very bold voice. I think it's incredibly well written. I really like the way that the chronology was used in the book. So there is a little bit of moving between time periods, not massively so. I'm not in a structured way really, but it flows very naturally. And as we are in the main narrative, we hear Jesse sort of recalling specific experiences from his past, from his time growing up, and how that has impacted on him in the present day. The opening of the book is really interesting because we actually follow a different character, a character called Norman Alonso, who moves with his wife from Jamaica to Black Country in England during the 1950s. And it's just the sort of opening section that is about Norman Alonso, and we see how he has these expectations of what it will be like when he arrives in England, and how the reception that he actually receives is nothing like what he had expected, unfortunately. I think it's a really effective way of opening the book because it puts Jesse's story into that wider context, and I think it works really, really well. One thing I did particularly like about the book is that music plays a really important role. I should have said Jesse's story is set sort of throughout the 2000s, and music plays a really central role to the story, and in particular there is a lot of mention of Sugar Babes, which I thought was a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed this book. I would highly recommend it. I think it's incredibly well written. It's a debut novel and it's incredible, and I'm definitely going to be looking out for whatever Paul Mendez writes next. It looks at themes of race, religion, sexuality, and love, and it's really quite a remarkable book. Today is Saturday the 25th of June, and I have read 3 books this week. They are all queer. So first up we have The Animals at Lockwood Manor by Jane Healy. This is a historical fiction novel set in 1939 at the start of World War II. And our main character Hetty works in a museum in London. I don't think the museum's ever actually specified, but she looks after the natural history collection, specifically the mammals at the museum. So at the outbreak of war, the natural history collection is evacuated to keep it safe to the countryside to Lockwood Manor, and Hetty goes with the collection to look after it and make sure it's okay. So she ends up in Lockwood Manor, living with the family who own and live in Lockwood Manor, and their servants. So it's about her sort of getting to know this family. It's quite a gothic novel, and there are there's a slight mysterious feel to it. It's not overly creepy. The most creepy thing about this for me really is the fact of the animals, because I am really creeped out by like natural history collections. It just kind of makes my skin crawl, and whenever I'm near one in a museum I have to like rush through to get past it because it creeps me out. So it probably wouldn't be as creepy for most readers. I wasn't terribly engaged with the book. I felt like I could see the author's pen too clearly. I could see the cogs working in her mind. There are some classic sort of gothic tropes in here, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I felt like it was too derivative of specific other novels, which I won't mention because it could be spoilers. I'm just not sure it was doing anything terribly special. The way the book went as well, for me, you know, towards the end when certain things are revealed, I felt like it came a little bit out of the blue. Like, I'm not sure it was set up in the best way. I didn't like how it went. There is LGBTQ rep in this book, which is great, but it's not a book I would particularly recommend. It didn't quite work for me. On a more positive note, I then read You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. So I was very excited for this book because I love Akwaeke Emezi, and this is a romance. So I don't read a lot of romance really, and it's just not a genre I am terribly drawn to. So I was slightly nervous going into this book. Our main character is called Thea, and her husband has tragically died. This is like at the start of the book, we're aware of this, so she's grieving for her husband, and she is kind of contemplating whether or not she wants to be in a relationship, if she wants to meet someone or not. The book develops into a love triangle. And there is an element of forbidden love, and yeah, I mean, it's not my favourite thing. There are some classic sort of romance tropes in here, which, because I don't really like romance, I guess I was never entirely going to get along with. There is also the fact that she meets this person and they're like instantly in love and just like totally, yeah, which I find slightly unbelievable, to the point where it was almost laughable, if I'm being honest. But that aside, despite that, I really enjoyed the book. I found it very engaging. Emezi is obviously a wonderful writer. The book explores grief, I think, really well. So I think there's 2 or 3 characters in the book who sort of for different reasons are grieving, and I think that's explored really well. Of course, there is LGBTQ rep in this book, which was really great, and yeah, I liked it. I did like it. It's not my favourite book by Akwaeke Emezi, but I don't think it was ever going to be, but I would recommend it. And then I read Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender. So this is a YA novel. Our main character is Felix Love. He is a trans teenager living in New York at high school. I think he's maybe like 17 years old. Despite his surname, he fears that he is never going to find love. He worries that he is, and I'll quote the back of the book, one marginalisation too many, black, queer and transgender. So the book does feature a love triangle, which again is not my favourite thing. and I'm conscious that I'm not the target audience of this book. It is a YA novel, so there are certain aspects of the romance sort of storyline which was slightly eye-rolly, but that's possibly to be expected. One of the main sort of plot points in the book, and this is all mentioned on the blurb at the back, is that there's some sort of art exhibition at the school, and some unknown person has hacked Felix's Instagram, stolen photos of him pre-transition, and displayed these photos in the art exhibition using his dead name. And so part of the book is Felix trying to find out who would do this. Another aspect of the book is how Felix goes on to sort of further question and explore his own gender identity. We see him throughout the book attending a gender identity discussion group at some I think it's like at a community centre, and so there's some really interesting conversations that take place there as Felix meets other people of various different gender identities who sort of help him to think about his own gender identity and how he feels about that, because he says that even though he knows he's not a girl, there are times when he doesn't necessarily feel like a boy. And I thought the discussions that take place in that group were really, really interesting. There's also a discussion around labels, and so the idea that if we lived in a perfect world, maybe we wouldn't need to label our gender or our sexuality, which I think is a fair point. And then the other side of that discussion is, well, actually we don't live in an ideal world, and it is important for people to be able to display who they are, put a name to that, and to feel, I guess, part of a wider community. So I thought there were some really quite nuanced conversations that took place through that. And the other thing that I think this book explores in an interesting way is prejudice within the queer community. So Felix's group of friends are, I think, all queer, but it's interesting to see how, you know, there are prejudices that do exist there within the queer community, and I think it's really good that that's explored in this book, in a YA book, because it's not something that you necessarily hear about that much, but I think it does exist. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I found this quite an engaging read. It took me a little bit to get into, but once I was into it, yeah, I enjoyed it. I think it's good and I would recommend it. Hello, it's now the end of June and I have 3 final books to talk about. First is Not Before Sundown by Johanna Sinisalo, which is translated from the Finnish by Herbert Lomas. So I read this for Gender Librarians LGBTQ Books in Translation read along. And this is a very strange book. It's about Mikhail, who finds a troll in the street who's sort of being terrorised by a group of thugs. He takes the troll home, he sort of looks after him, and I guess it's really about the bond between Mikhail and this troll. We have a few different narrative perspectives, so one of which is Mikhail. Then I think we have 3 other different narrative perspectives around of people who know Mikhail in different ways. The book is also interspersed with these sort of what is presented as factual sort of accounts of trolls in history, sort of encyclopedia entries and sort of different things like that, which they're only, you know, quite short, like half a page each, which I thought was a really effective way to tell a story, because I thought it really lent something to the overall impact of the book. And I'm not going to lie, there was a point when I was reading this book where I was questioning whether trolls might actually be real. I don't think they are, but who knows. This is a very, very strange book, and there was a point when I was reading this where I was like, what am I reading? What has Jen made us read? So yeah. But overall, I actually really enjoyed it. Towards the end, the book becomes quite thriller-esque, which is my cup of tea anyway. I like plot and I like pace. So I particularly enjoyed sort of the final sections of the book. I liked the ending of the book. Obviously, I'm not going to say what that is. I liked the way that it went. I will say I'm not entirely sure I 100% got everything that was going on or entirely understood the intentions of the author, but I still enjoyed it. Since reading the book, I have learned that the title of the book, Not Before Sundown, is taken from, or is the name of, a Finnish children's song. And each of the sort of overall sections of the book, the title of those sections are from lyrics from that song. So that sort of adds another layer to it, which I think is really interesting. I've seen a couple of different covers to this book, and I think I actually prefer the cover that I got, which I was slightly disappointed with when it arrived. This is secondhand, but I quite like it because I think the troll described in the book looks like, in my mind, the one on this cover, more so than this type of troll, which is what I've seen on sort of the other book cover. So yeah, you can go back there. And of course there is some LGBTQ rep in the book as well. So I think that gets the award for strangest book of the year so far. Next up, I read Jack of Spades by Joyce Carol Oates. So this is a book that I heard Criminali mention and thought it sounded interesting. I hadn't read anything by Joyce Carol Oates before. Our main character is an author who is quite successful, but he also writes under a pseudonym, Jack of Spades. No one knows that he is Jack of Spades. There's a mystery around who Jack of Spades is. I think not even the publishers know who he is. And under Jack of Spades, he writes books which are sort of darker and I guess maybe more controversial. At the start of the book, a woman accuses our main character, Andrew, of plagiarising her work. So she is not a well-known author. I don't know if she's even published, but she is accusing him of plagiarising her work, so she takes him to court. And really the bulk of the book is around him trying to figure out, who she is and why she is saying he has plagiarised her, because he hasn't. The book is written in the style of sort of a 90s thriller. Stephen King is specifically mentioned at several points throughout, and I think it does have that sort of Stephen King vibe about the book as well. Overall, I enjoyed it. It was quite fast-paced, which I liked, but I will say that I only read this earlier this week, and I'm already struggling to remember what happened in the book. Yeah, I've just read the final pages and I can remember what happened now, obviously because I've just read it. But yeah, I enjoyed it. Possibly a little bit forgettable, I would say, but I'd be keen to read some more of Joyce Carol Oates' work because I know she is a very prolific author. And then the final book that I read in June was Murder in the Museum by John Rowland. So this is a British library crime classic. I enjoy reading these books. This is like comfort reading for me. I've never read anything by this author before. This got off to a really good start. So a man is found dead in the reading room of the British Museum. Initially thought to be natural causes. Turns out he was poisoned by cyanide. This is all on the back of the book. And so we get an investigation into his death. We have a character called Henry Fairhurst, who is a mild-mannered museum visitor who uses his detection talents to sort of assist the police in discovering the murderer. As things progress, of course, we do get more than one murder. I did enjoy this for the most part. It has a very classic feel about it. I felt like it floundered somewhat in the second half, and by the time the reveal comes, which I'm not going to say what that is, I couldn't tell you even if I wanted to, because when the reveal comes and we find out who done it, I had no idea who this character was, and I think I was meant to know who they were, and I didn't know who they were, and there wasn't really much explanation of who they were and why they did it, and the book kind of ended fairly soon after that. So I was kind of left a little bit in the dark. I mean, I don't know if that was just me being totally oblivious. It's entirely possible. So it did fall flat for me at the ending, but I would be keen to read more by this author. I don't know if he's got any other books that are still like in publication or in circulation, but I liked the overall style. I found it enjoyable and engaging. It fell flat at the end for me. So those are all the books that I read in June. Please do let me know if you've read any of them, what you thought of them, and let me know what you've been reading and if you have any recommendations for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye.